AwesomeMan67 underscore says hey kids. AwesomeMan67 underscore says welocme to another MCVID. AwesomeMan67 underscore says today wearing it. AwesomeMan67 underscore says be Kylan the Ender Dragon. AwesomeMan67 underscore says in MC. AwesomeMan67 underscore says okay. AwesomeMan67 underscore says first. AwesomeMan67 underscore says you need to travel to the end. 67 underscore says Ferd Praisa. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then go to search. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then type in portal. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then put into INV. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then press E. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then go to search. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then type I of ender. AwesomeMan67 underscore says then put in INV. AwesomeMan67 underscore says now. AwesomeMan67 underscore says place like this. AwesomeMan67 underscore says now. AwesomeMan67 underscore says put the ender pearls in. AwesomeMan67 underscore says but. AwesomeMan67 underscore says make sure they're in the right position. AwesomeMan67 underscore says go to my idol. AwesomeMan67 underscore says and put in from middle. AwesomeMan67 underscore says okay now. AwesomeMan67 underscore says I pout last one in. AwesomeMan67 underscore says 43. AwesomeMan67 underscore says 2. AwesomeMan67 underscore says 1. AwesomeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeMan67 underscore says not bro. AwesomeMan67 underscore says not. AwesomeMan67 underscore says it ain't be workin' man. AwesomeMan67 underscore says Bruno. AwesomeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeMan67 underscore says okay. AwesomeMan67 underscore says 1 SEC. AwesomeMan67 underscore says Imina ask chat. AwesomeMan67 underscore says okay. AwesomeMan67 underscore says so. AwesomeMan67 underscore says I'm Juds RLY stupid LOOOOL. AwesomeMan67 underscore says well. AwesomeMan67 underscore says I'm like super spat but RNIB doing something key in the spat. AwesomeMan67 underscore says okay. AwesomeMan67 underscore says I'm in a place that's one. AwesomeMan67 underscore has made the advancement the end. AwesomeMan67 underscore says now go up. AwesomeMan67 underscore says now get me a sword. AwesomeMan67 underscore says now Kyle. says I killed. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says UES. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says so bad. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says so bad. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says actually had it game. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says BGRO so EE's BGRO. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says yo. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says green balls. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I am rich. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says okay. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says now I have to use the dragon EG. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says get. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says get the dragon EG. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I literally mind it. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says it not in my INV. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says what? AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I mind it. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says dude. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says gratin egg chan. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says chan. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says ballast chan. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says volume. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says keto. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says no drop chan. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says dragon egg chan. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says WHYYYY. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says N, Ron. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says no. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says breathe. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says breathe. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says BRU. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. 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 AwesomeeMan67 underscore says no. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I want it. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I need it. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says why. 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 AwesomeeMan67 underscore says WHYYY. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says dude INM so NG. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says wood. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says dud day. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I want. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I want. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I mind it UBT it not min my INV. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says IT not in my INV. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says IT not in my INVE. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says IT not in dare. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bruo. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro TS. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says TS bad. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says NAHHH. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I hate TS game. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nah. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I am not doing TS anymore. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I quit. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I quit forever. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says for real THS time. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says type crap. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bro. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I key. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says start in now. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says NYT2. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says no MC and no YT. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says bye. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says forever. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says okay. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says cause I am quitting. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says I am quitting the game. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says nad YT so im nodina be uploadin'. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says T is my last VID. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says no more vids. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says no more from channel AwesomeeMan. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says TTHE best ytber in the world. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says the best per in the world. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says the best BW bedwars player in the world. AwesomeeMan67 underscore says the smattest person in the world.